At every turn in Parliament, Boris Johnson takes a battering. First at PMQs, scolded by the Speaker.
Prime Minister, sit down, Prime Minister. I'm not going to be challenged. You may be the Prime Minister of this country, but in this House, I'm in charge, and we're going to carry on.
Then questioned by senior MPs, an admission on the debacle over Owen Paterson.
The committee will agree that I've accepted that it was a mistake and that it was my mistake.
And to top it all, criticism tonight from some of his own MPs after a special meeting for backbenchers. We'll get full analysis from Carl and Robert, as questions mount too over whether the second jobs plan is even workable. Also on News at 10 tonight. All eyes on interest rates, Joel on inflation hitting a 10-year high and all of our pockets. Her Majesty back on duty as Prince Charles is asked how she's doing.
But once you get to 95, it's not quite as easy as it used to be.
Thank you so much.
It's bad enough at 73.
Not just dinghies bringing migrants ashore, how an old trawler was pressed into action by a criminal gang, and after all that social distancing, a call to arms, the secrets of the perfect hug revealed.
This is ITV News at 10 with Julie Etchingham.
Good evening. It was 2 weeks ago tonight that the Prime Minister's tactics on policing MPs' behaviour and saving his friend Owen Paterson from suspension ignited a political row that has been burning almost out of control ever since. Tonight, Mr Johnson's new way forward on MPs' second jobs was voted through, but in the teeth of opposition from some of his own backbenchers. Indeed, it has been another bruising day for the Prime Minister. He was branded a coward by the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer. He was rebuked twice by the Speaker of the Commons. Later, in front of a committee of senior MPs, Mr Johnson admitted it had been a total mistake to link the case of Mr Paterson to reforming parliamentary standards. This evening, he went further at a meeting of backbenchers. On a clear road, he told them he had crashed the car into a ditch.
Rosanna Allen-Cahn MP is also a doctor. Penny Mordaunt, a naval reservist. Douglas Ross, a football referee. Not the controversial consultancy work that has caused the latest storm, but all now under scrutiny after Boris Johnson, occasional journalist, author and after-dinner speaker, tried to reform the system to help a colleague.
Will he do the decent thing and just say sorry for trying to give the green light to corruption?
Mr. Speaker, well, yes, as I've said before, it certainly was a mistake.
That's not an apology. A coward, not a leader.
Keir Starmer was rebuked for that by the Speaker, who then tore strips off the Prime Minister for breaking the rules and asking the Labour leader questions.
We still have not heard why the Honourable Gentleman will not tell...
Order. Minister, Prime Minister, sit down, Prime Minister. I'm not going to be challenged. You may be the Prime Minister of this country, but in this House, I'm in charge, and we're going to carry on. End of that.
Conservative backbenchers haven't been impressed by the government's performance on all this either.
I don't think anyone thinks this has been very well handled. There were lots of colleagues that were persuaded to vote with the government 2 weeks ago, who I think largely regret having done so. I don't think they'll make that mistake again on this issue, and I think standards matter.
The Prime Minister later admitted that trying to change the standard system to help Owen Paterson had been his fault.
It was a mistake and that it was my mistake. All we wanted to do was to see whether there was any scope for cross-party agreement on an appeals process.
But rebuilding can get out of hand, and MPs are now considering how much time should be allowed on any second jobs. But it's not that simple, says Ben Bradley, MP and leader of Nottinghamshire Council.
I think it's really difficult to know what reasonable is. People have talked about, do you prioritise the commons? Well, how do you measure that? It's really difficult to say. I prioritise my children, but I still spend more time at work than I do at home. So it's not about time necessarily.
Tonight, MPs voted to ban paid consultancies, with further details to be worked out by committee. But they rejected a Labour proposal setting out a timetable.
It is unbelievable
that after the last 2 weeks, the Prime Minister has whipped his MPs yet again to vote down a plan of action on standards. And that tells you all you need to know about how seriously the Prime Minister is actually taking this issue.
Before his day was over, the Prime Minister had to address his backbenchers, and he's reported to have told them, on a clear road, I crashed the car into a ditch. Carl Dinnan, News at 10, Westminster.
Well, let's see what Robert thinks of all of this. He joins us from his studio where he's recording his programme, coming up a bit later. Robert, a really torrid day for the Prime Minister. How much damage is this doing to him, do you think?
I think very significant damage. He himself conceded it's been an appalling 2 weeks for him, and it was all started by that misjudgment that he made in basically ordering his MPs to overturn, or at least push to one side for a period, a judgment against a friend and colleague, Owen Paterson, who was found guilty of lobbying that broke the rules. And since then, there's just been an absolute onslaught of revelations about MPs with second jobs, about questionable contracts being awarded. And at the end of all of that, he has signed up to a reform programme that actually was first outlined by the Standards Committee back in 2018. And so there's a legitimate question, which is, you know, why has it taken them 3 years to get round to doing what many people think are sensible things? But if you're a Tory MP who has a second job and have been boosting their income, you know, you take a different view, which is you say the Prime Minister's mistake is costing you a lot of money. So he's being attacked on all sides by those who think that actually the rules should be tightened up, and those who are going to be a lot poorer because they are being tightened up. So he is more marginalised, more isolated than I've ever seen him. On my show, I actually interviewed a former minister, Robert Jenrick, and he conceded something which, in public, something which almost everybody I talk to in the Tory party talks about, which is he simply doesn't have heavyweight advice near him to stop him making these mistakes. It's a serious structural flaw, and at the moment, no sign of how he's going to solve it.
OK, Robert, thank you very much indeed for that. We'll see you a bit later on. Now, it's not what most people want to hear as the Christmas shopping season begins in earnest. Prices are going up faster than at any time for 10 years. Inflation jumped from 3.1% in September to 4.2% in October, higher than expected. The culprits: higher gas and electricity bills, petrol prices and more expensive meals out. It means more pressure on family finances and on the Bank of England to raise interest rates.
£15 altogether, sir. Anything else for you?
At Trowbridge Market, they're feeling the impact of high inflation. Prices are rising across the board as the UK, like many countries, is hit by shortages of goods and labour.
Going to go up again. It's certainly not going to go down, is it?
Pete and Sue Wells are worried about how much it will cost to heat their home this winter.
Unless they put the pension up again, I can't see how we could afford to pay more than what we're paying now.
It's cold outside,
I really can't see where that would come from.
I'm 75 now. I shouldn't be having to think about all this. You know, I shouldn't be depressed.
The annual rate of inflation has risen from 0.7% last October to 4.2% last month. A surge in energy prices is pushing inflation higher. The average price of petrol has risen from 113 pence per litre to 138 pence in the last year. In the last month alone, electricity prices rose by almost 9% and gas prices by 17%. The Bank of England expects inflation to remain high, peaking at 5% in April. Almost all of the above-target inflation we're experiencing is being caused by a boom in demand for goods, which began in lockdown. The Bank of England thinks it should be short-lived, but it's worried about strains in our domestic labour market. The government's furlough scheme has ended and the economy is awash with jobs, but a significant minority of companies complain they are struggling to get hold of the staff they need. The concern is that wages will rise, which could trigger another round of price increases. The Bank of England is clearly signalling it is preparing to raise interest rates to contain inflation. Companies are working harder to attract staff and hold on to those they've got. Lidl announced an above-inflation pay rise for 21,000 of its workers today. Meanwhile, unions are pushing for better pay to protect their members from a squeeze on living standards.
We have to get pay rising again, and that's got to mean that pay packets have got to stretch to meet those extra costs that we're seeing on energy, on fuel, on supermarket bills. Of course people need pay increases above inflation, and that's important for the economy too.
Higher interest rates won't unblock ports, cut energy bills or help recruit lorry drivers. They will cool consumer demand and therefore demand for labour. It's not a pleasant lever to pull, but the Bank of England may feel it has little choice. John Hills, News at 10.
Police investigating the bomb explosion outside a Liverpool hospital on Sunday have removed several suspicious packages from a house in the city they've been searching. They also now believe the bomber, Ahmed al-Swalmi, had been buying components as long ago as April and perhaps even before that. Hannah is in Liverpool tonight. Hannah, another really busy 24 hours in this investigation.
Yes, for the people who live here, there's certainly a bit of a sense of what on earth is going to happen next. They were all told to stay inside their homes for several hours this afternoon after police discovered suspicious packages in that property behind me where al-Swalmi once lived. The bomb disposal team were brought in, forensic teams have taken the packages away. But police say the picture that they're building of how he bought items for his explosive device is complex, and it started at least 7 months ago. It led, we now know, to this, the explosion in a taxi outside Liverpool Women's Hospital, which killed al-Swalmi and from which the taxi driver was lucky to escape with his life. After some confusion about his nationality, we've also learnt today that al-Swalmi was born in Iraq. He was a failed asylum seeker who had stayed in the country for at least 7 years and had been in touch with his MP about his asylum case as recently as last year. Police have confirmed that they're also considering episodes of mental illness as part of their investigation. They're not looking for anyone else, but they are still definitely looking for a motive and information about his mindset in the run-up to the attack.
OK, Hannah, thank you very much indeed for that. Now, the Queen hasn't been filmed meeting anyone in person for nearly a month. Until today, she seemed to be over the worst of the back sprain that kept her away from the Remembrance Sunday ceremony, when she held an audience with the head of Britain's armed forces at Windsor Castle. The topic of the Queen's health came up during Prince Charles' trip to Jordan, when he was asked very directly about it.
The Chief of Defence Staff, Your Majesty. Your Majesty.
Good morning.
Good morning. Hello, you.
Have returned to light duties for the Queen and one of her dogs today to pass on thanks to Britain's outgoing Defence Chief.
It's rather sad. It's yours.
I know, 8 years as a Chief of Staff.
The Queen has not had an in-person engagement since the 19th of October and on doctor's orders cancelled almost everything until this one today.
I suppose if you're getting into that job, you know, it's easier to continue.
His 8 years in the job doesn't really compare to her 69 years, but the Queen is at least back up and about. In Jordan, meanwhile, her son Prince Charles said the Queen was all right when asked on the royal tour about his mother's health. He and Camilla were supporting Jordan's tourism industry at this ancient site, which dates back to the 4th century BC. But he was later asked about the Queen.
She's all right, thank you very much, thank you. But once you get to 95, you know, it's not quite as easy as it used to be. It's bad enough at 73.
The Queen herself has had many close ties with Jordan during her reign, and as her son marked the creation of Jordan by the British in 1921, he spoke tonight about his mother's bond with this country.
I feel this friendship in the most personal of ways, as Jordan has always been a part of my life. His Majesty King Hussein came to the throne in 1952, the same year as my dear mother the Queen. They would be of great mutual support to each other through the decades ahead.
Overseas travel for the Queen is now a thing of the past. That baton has firmly been handed to her son and daughter-in-law, like today in the hills above the Sea of Galilee. But tourism in Jordan has been severely damaged by the pandemic, and the Prince and Duchess were here to help showcase some of this country's gems. Chris Ship, News at 10, Case, Jordan.
A £100 million RAF fighter jet is tonight lying at the bottom of the Mediterranean after something went wrong during a training flight. The pilot of the F-35 ejected safely, but it's not clear what the problem was. The plane was taking part in what the Ministry of Defence called routine flying operations launched from the aircraft carrier HMS Queen Elizabeth. The ship is heading home after exercises with Indian Armed Forces. Former Yorkshire spin bowler Azim Rafiq looked relieved to have got it over with as the shockwaves from his evidence to MPs about racism reverberated through cricket. He told us the reaction from some of what he called the middle-aged white men running the game was way off the mark. Closer to home, his wife was smiling again, he said. His father had told him no amount of runs or wickets could have achieved what he did in Parliament yesterday.
He's had death threats. They've tried to discredit him. He's effectively been called a liar. All that, in addition to coping with the trauma of daily racist abuse as a cricketer. No wonder Azim Rafiq's family are proud of him for exposing the sport's ugly secret.
Yeah, incredibly proud. My dad said to me, look, no runs or wickets, could have done what you've done, and I'm really proud of you. And yeah, that's an incredibly proud thing for me. Because he sacrificed his world for us. And my wife, yeah, she was really, really proud. And she doesn't say a lot, but she was smiling, and I haven't seen her smile for a while.
Rafiq stunned an audience of MPs yesterday, describing his harrowing experiences. He also spoke about former teammates who still deny his allegations and those who claim they never witnessed any wrongdoing.
What would you say to those people who are in denial about the impact that their behaviour had on you personally?
All I want to tell them is how them so-called little things to them, how over a period of time it broke me to a point where I nearly committed suicide. And that, I think that's, hopefully yesterday's done some of that.
Are you convinced that there are still players in dressing rooms up and down the country today who are going through what you went through?
Yeah, they have. A lot of former players. I think current players are in a difficult situation. They don't want to be seen as rocking the boat, but hopefully yesterday and the sort of movement in the direction that we want to take this shows them that it's fine.
It shouldn't be like that, should it?
Well, no, it shouldn't, and that again shows institutional racism.
Rafiq called for Yorkshire's board to quit if the club had any chance of reform. He's prepared to give the ECB a short period of grace to tackle this crisis, but says the game needs a complete overhaul.
Can cricket police itself, genuinely?
No. I think it's a cosy game controlled by middle-aged white men who think that they're doing the right thing, but they're completely off the mark.
Thanks to Rafiq, the sport has a chance to tackle its toxic culture where it exists. Given the number of messages he's received recently, it may be the poison is more widespread than cricket is prepared to admit. Steve Scott, News at 10.
Now, if you were watching News at 10 last night, you won't have forgotten our report on migrants in northern France piling into a huge rubber dinghy without a French police officer in sight. That is, of course, a common way for migrants to cross the Channel. Today, though, a court case involving a dilapidated fishing boat ended with convictions for 4 members of a people smuggling gang. They were caught with 69 migrants on board, but only 1 life raft for 20 people. They planned to make a similar crossing every week.
Buffeted by waves, this old fishing boat was being used by smugglers to bring illegal migrants into Britain. When the Border Force intercepted the vessel last November, they were astonished to find the lower decks packed with people. As they brought them ashore at Harwich, they counted 69 Albanians, including 2 pregnant women who'd been picked up in Belgium. Today, 3 men from Latvia, Lithuania and Israel were found guilty of planning to bring the migrants across the North Sea route.
This crime group clearly looked at the problem that they had. We need to get migrants from Europe into the UK, and they thought, here's a way to do it. Get a bigger vessel, use an unconventional route, and we'll make lots of money.
It emerged that the Svanik had been bought in Latvia. The crime gang had paid for basic alterations so she could carry passengers. The migrants filmed their journey towards Great Yarmouth, where it's thought the smugglers planned to offload their human cargo. They'd paid £15,000 each to make the crossing.
The most rudimentary repairs had been carried out, but this was still fundamentally a dangerous boat. It had a life raft that would carry a maximum of 20 people and life jackets for just 21 of the 69 migrants who were crammed into these tiny rooms.
The crew attempting to steer the Svanik had grounded her twice, once off Sweden and again off the Belgian coast, raising suspicions amongst the Coast Guard there. The computer found on board contained invaluable details linking the boat to the crime group. One of the men, Arturas Jusas, was tracked down to his home in South London.
I'm here this morning to arrest you.
A search of his house led the National Crime Agency to damning phone evidence, including this conversation.
We're going to bring you every week 50 people. Just we need to invest now 40,000 if you want, 20 you, 20 me. From first trip, we're going to get that money back.
Thousands of migrants have risked their lives to cross the channel, but even the largest rubber dinghies can't compete with the capacity offered by a converted fishing boat, raising fears that vessels like the Svanik may signal the next step for those trading in illegal immigration. Juliet Bremner, News at 10.
With his distinctive Viking-style headdress and his face painted with the stars and the stripes, pictures of Jacob Chansley were flashed around the world after the storming of the Capitol building in Washington back in January. Well, today he was sentenced to 41 months. He'd already pleaded guilty in September to entering a restricted building and disorderly conduct. He wasn't accused of anything violent, and he admitted to the judge that it had been wrong of him to go in there. "I have no excuse," he said, and called his behaviour indefensible.
On January the 6th, alongside us on the threshold of the Capitol, there was one man who stood out amid the mob. USA! USA! Jacob Chansley became the face of the insurrection. We lost sight of him shortly after this moment, but he re-emerged into the Senate chamber itself, leading other Trump supporters in a prayer. 10 months after his arrest, he was today sentenced to more than 3 years behind bars. The judge calling his action of obstructing democracy horrific. Inside the courtroom, Jacob Chansley directly addressed the judge, saying he wasn't a violent man, wasn't a domestic terrorist, and wasn't an insurrectionist. Rather, he said, "I am a good man who broke the law." Showing me the bedroom where Jacob had grown up, his mother told me that her son had suffered abuse and deep trauma as a child.
That's a heck of a tough upbringing for a kid.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. That's why it's so painful. He doesn't deserve that. He doesn't. At all. It was torturous, Robert.
And she blamed Donald Trump for her son's storming of Congress.
And we're going to the Capitol.
Following the former president's apparent instructions earlier that day.
He's not a domestic terrorist. He's not a terrorist at all. He's just a young man who went into the building and thinking that President Trump had his back.
He thought he had the president's authority, permission.
That is correct. He felt he had permission from the president to go there, which he did. He was invited.
The mental health of the man who became known as the QAnon shaman was at the heart of the sentencing hearing today. His lawyer telling me that Chansley now wants to deal with his personality disorder.
His focus is on what do I need to do to commence the healing process, to commence getting better, to commence treatment, working on being a better person.
Jacob Chansley became the symbol of a day of infamy, and today said he is entirely repentant. Robert Moore, News at 10, Washington.
Anyone who uses a Visa credit card to do their shopping on the Amazon website will have to find another way to pay. Amazon says it won't accept them after the middle of January because Visa are charging too much for processing credit card sales. Visa debit cards and other credit cards like American Express and MasterCard will still be fine to use. And the most famous landmark in the North Wales town of Abergele near Colwyn Bay is once again about to become the focal point of TV viewing in millions of homes. Yes, Gurrick Castle is hosting its second series of I'm a Celebrity. The first series earned the castle enough money to carry out some much-needed repairs to allow visitors in. But for the contestants, things will be, if anything, even less comfortable than last year.
Once more, the castle on the hill has been called into service. Wales sitting in for New South Wales as plans to return to Australia were scuppered by uncertainty over the pandemic.
I'm Frankie Bridge.
I'm David Ginola.
I'm Louise Minchin. The lineup is out, featuring names from TV, music and sport. The hope that they can draw record viewing figures like last year.
Go on, not that slow.
That series of I'm a Celebrity, perhaps helped by the novelty factor of a new location, was named the most watched non-news broadcast of 2020. The change should, says one previous contestant, now become permanent.
I think the castle has something, and being, to see it in the UK and I guess for last year, for how many people viewed and everything else, it was nice, I think, to have it, and I think they should keep it now.
And for those who thought that the contestants might have had it a little bit easy last year, there is this new addition, the Clink, where half the campmates will start their no-frills experience. And remember those raised beds they slept on last year? Well, this year, this is the bedroom. Gurrick Castle has been adapted to have two separate camps, as there were in Australia. And that's not the only change. Handing over the use of the castle to ITV has helped the owners pay for restorations that have been decades in the planning.
We've had parts of the building re-roofed, all the wall tops repaired, and we've been able to get people right into the heart of the castle.
For the first time?
First time in probably nearly 40 years.
The town of Abergele has been ready and waiting for the return. A reported £1 million was brought into the Wales economy by siting the production in the country. Businesses who benefited don't want them to get out of here.
Australia didn't want you, we do, so I think, you know what, you've got to do it another year.
This year, as ever, millions will be chained to their sets. Nina Nanar, News at 10 in North Wales.
Nina looking very enthusiastic about it all. Now, finally, the art of hugging has been somewhat neglected because of social distancing during the pandemic, of course. So for those feeling a bit out of practice, and with Christmas not that far away, there were some useful tips to embrace today. Researchers from a string of universities have come up with the optimum length for a hug. Yes, really, 5 to 10 seconds, apparently. There's even advice on what to do with your arms.
What's the best thing about long journeys? The hugs at the end of them, of course.
How was that hug?
Thrilling.
Great.
We've been apart for 2 years. We're
two
best
years
friends.
Muy bien, muy bien.
Pero había algo más. They found out nada tampoco.
Bebé a bordo.
It was great to hug. Absolutely.
Good to hug.
It was a great hug.
Good hug.
Yeah.
I mean, it looked like a good one.
It was up there. One of the better hugs of the day.
Well, there's now some research to tell us how to hug best. It's found that hugs in which one person puts their arms around the waist while the other embraces the neck or shoulders are the most pleasant, while the so-called criss-cross hug is apparently not quite as good. Psychologists also found that hugs which don't last very long can be disappointing. A 10-second hug delivers much higher levels of happiness.
It's okay.
And there were good reasons why the hugs we could finally have when lockdown restrictions were eased came as such a relief.
So when we hug somebody, it's sending a signal to that person that we're there for them. It's showing that we're providing social support, which we know makes us happy, and it also makes us feel less stressed because it feels like we've got resources to cope with things in life.
There are times, of course, when attempted hugs can go badly wrong.
Here we go. Yeah.
Like at international climate conferences, for example.
Gender interacts with the type of arm crossing. So men are more likely to use crisscross hugs with other men than women are among each other.
Whatever your technique, as the time of year approaches where we will be seeing more of the people we want to hug, the scientific advice is clear. Don't be too brief.
Get right, Vincent, News at 10.
Get that stopwatch out. That is it from us for tonight. Hugs from all of us here on News at 10. Good night.